Welcome, everybody, to the book launch of Unbreaking India by Sanjay Dixit. Decisions on the CAA and Article 370. So, this book has had a tumultuous voyage getting here. And Sanjay was one of the very, very brave people whose book was already listed. It was up there on the major portals, and he decided to pull it off, pull it out actually from the previous publisher at the last moment on a matter of principle when Delhi riots was canned. And since then, a lot of work has also gotten onto the book. We have a new cover, and this book is an absolutely stunning um, exposure of all of the events that led to the partition and beyond. But before I go much further, I'm going to welcome our guest of honor, our chief guest here, Sri Vikram Sood. Welcome, Mr. Sood. Mr. Sood is the former RAW chief who retired in 2003, and he's author of The Ultimate Goal, which probes into the challenges of democracy and the challenges of democracy and democratic
I think we've lost Sankrant for a bit. Mr. Sood, if you are hearing me,
Yeah,
I think, so I think I'll take over for the moment from Sankrant, and I would request you to say a few things about the book or whatever you read about it. And before we can get Sankrant in, let's not wait for him. I think he should be back soon.
Well, thanks a lot for having me here for this book launch. It's a great pleasure to be speaking about it. I've heard you, Sanjay, quite often at the Jaipur dialogues, not just with me, but with so many others.
Sankrant is back, so we hand over reins back to him.
Wonderful,
so
wonderful. Yes, I got
so many others before that.
into some technical issues.
Congratulate you on this very excellent book that you put together. And I think I'll list out what I think were the main qualities of the book. It was the clarity of thought that you went through with that, mastery of the facts that you produced. Then you correlated them to the present context and with the past. Yes, it is from the book that we learned a lot about the past, or relearned it, or refreshed our memories. And then, but you do not dwell on it. You go forward. You look at the present and the future, which is a great thing to do. And another pleasing aspect that I found about the book was that the chapters are small. They're not lengthy, long-winded chapters, which makes it, it makes it more, in a way, racy. It holds your attention fast, quicker, for a longer period. And in these days, social media and Facebook, where attention spans are 180, whatever they call characters, this book holds your interest, and which is very, very important, because if you don't hold the interest, you may as well not read it. So you've done that very well, and I must congratulate you for having put it together like this.
Thank you,
I hope our youngsters read this book, because this is meant also for the young, because so many of us are now 50 years old or plus, and it was That happened, and that was 1972, 70, or 1970. It was just before the Bangladesh in India-Pakistan war in Bangladesh. Generations have grown after that. They know less and less about the past, and we need to tell them how it was and how it happened. And you do that very nicely. Congratulations again. The
Thank you,
other
sir.
aspect that I liked was, as I mentioned, and it's not just the facts, it's not just the opinion or the historical concept that historical context that you're giving. You backed it up with yards and yards of documents. I think your main book ends at page 250, but there are another 130 pages or so of documentation, which is very important because it gives you the factual, hard fact background to the book. And it's interesting, it's got anecdotes, it's backed by, as I said, 130 pages of documents. So I would recommend this book highly to anyone who wants to know what is going on in the world. And I particularly like when on page 72, for instance, you referred to, you're talking about Pakistan, and you were saying that we fundamentally erred in not understanding the mindset and tactics of the Muslim League. We means, I suppose, the Congress party. And you pointed out that, after the visit of the cabinet mission to India in March 46 to discuss the transfer of power, the Muslim League reveled in the usual tactics of being intractable. They simply would not let a decision be taken. So as a result, that this principle of attrition of what should I say this is the old Islamic practice of making a lot of noise, demanding things, and maximalist positions right from the beginning. And this has gone on even in Pakistan today. They haven't changed that tactic. They probably embellished it further. It is a continuum of a policy of the Muslim League. So I would not go too much into the details. I would leave that to you because the CAA and the other aspects of Article 370 are very important for the reader or for the listener to understand what exactly is the implication of this for all of us. And I just want to add that, everywhere else, democracy is a rule by majority, right? That is the cardinal principle. Now, if the majority happens to be Hindu and it votes in a particular way, that doesn't make me a Hindu majoritarian. It not even makes me a Hindu nationalist by just voting. But the narrative on this that has been built by our own people, by outsiders, and the two together, is that we are now in for fascism, for Hitler's systems. All kinds of phrases are coming out, which has to be countered repeatedly and strongly. And this is
You
what
mentioned that in your own book, I think.
Yes, I mentioned that in my own book, and I do believe in that. We make the mistake of saying we are secular. Actually, we are tolerant. The governments have to be secular. Governments are equidistant from religion. That is the meaning of secular. You and I can't be secular in that sense.
Exactly.
We may be a good Hindu, bad Hindu, good Christian, good Muslim, whatever. But I have a religion. I may be an atheist. That's another matter. But if you are a normal human being, you will have your faith. And a faith is just what it is, faith. It is not logic. So, so we have to distinguish between the two. We should have what they call the word for positivity towards all sections of society. I forget the word.
Inclusiveness.
Inclusiveness, no. Instead of appeasement, giving people their just requirements, regardless of religion. Entitlement comes from your maybe your impoverishment, your lack of facilities. It doesn't come from your religion.
You're quite right. This is something like the Prime Minister said, justice for all, appeasement for none.
Yes, that's exactly what I mean. So that's what we have to keep saying, keep telling, and repeating it again and again, more forcefully in different ways. Your book goes a long way to that, doing that, and I have enjoyed reading what I've read so far.
I think Sankrant is missing, so we can just do the rights of launching the book
Yes,
right here. Okay.
I'm here. I'm back.
This is how your book
Yeah, if we can hold up the cover.
You were about to launch it without you.
We're launching the book in the absence of the.
If we can hold up the cover again, Mr. Sood, we
guys
can
read the book like this.
Yes. Wow, it's very, very well annotated.
Congratulations.
A lot of congratulations on this long journey.
We hope to hear
Unbreaking
you
India.
tell us more about the book now.
Decisions on Article
Thank you for having me.
370 and the CAA. So with this, I'm actually going to turn it over to Sanjay ji to take us more through it. Sanjay ji, as I was reading the book, I was just fascinated by this whole landscape that you have drawn. This is not, we started off, in fact, I think the earlier title even focused on just Article 370 and CAA. But I find this book is more like an encyclopedia of Islamic history in the subcontinent in a way. It takes the whole draw, especially all of the events that led up to the partition. It's not only what happened after that, all of the events that led to the partition. And there's so many books, academics books that have come out, and there was a scholar at Harvard that had put out a book on the partition, and what are different roles, Jinnah's role, Gandhi's role. But I don't think I've actually read a book that does it so incisively. And in particular, one of the problems with all of the books I've read so far on this is that they completely ignore the Islamic theological angles that led up to the partition and why that has been a huge driving force. We kind of ignore it to make it into some kind of secularized version even of what happened in terms of the partition. So I'd love to hear your thoughts, take us deeper into it, give us some more teasers, and really the floor is yours, Sanjay ji.
Thank you, Sankrant, and thank you for bringing out this book. I know that when I had taken that momentous decision of pulling the book out from Bloomsbury, even as it was listed and it was there on Amazon, and even at that time I pulled it out on principle because they had canned a book supposedly at the behest of the white masters, and that is something that I just couldn't tolerate. I said, okay. And so, my own law background, I am now an enrolled advocate. That's it. Got it on the 28th of November. So with my own background in law, I found out a loophole and I terminated the contract using that. And they couldn't do a thing. Otherwise, a lot of other people also tried. They served them a notice and they had to backtrack.
Right.
They couldn't do that for me. So that's a secret that I can actually.
You manage the coup, and I think the book is also definitely better for it. I think the cover, I'd like you to talk about it. It's very unusual cover, and what is there on this cover? I've been getting so many questions about this cover.
Okay, this is the original thought of Pakistan. This is the Rahmat Ali map. This Rahmat Ali map, which was designed uh, going into the Pakistan resolution that was passed in Lahore in 1940. So this is the basic thought, and this is the basic thought is actually behind all of this, behind the protests against the CAA, behind Article 370 incorporation by fooling or rather pulling wool over the eyes of our the first prime minister. Uh, all of that is that the Mughal Empire was there, and it is our right to rule this country. This was Darul Islam, and this was taken out of our fold by the British. Okay, and so that is the first fundamental problems of narrative, because it wasn't taken by the British from the Mughals. It was taken by the British from the Marathas. The Marathas had already beaten the pulp out of the Mughals, and they were what they used to be called Shah Alam Aj Dilli Tap Alam. That was the extent of their territory at that time. But the narrative that has been built by this Ashraf Mullah Maulana class, all those who understand the Muslim politics must understand that the entire Muslim politics is actually around this Ashraf Mullah Maulana class. And all the rest are just grist to the mill. So the what is called Pasmanda, which is about 85% of the population of the Muslims, they're just simply supposed to follow what is called taqleed. Taqleed means that this simple population, the lay population, is not supposed to use aql. So from that, the taqleed is the preserve of the Ashraf Mullah Maulana class. That is that they rule by way of taqleed, that they have the monopoly on aql. Rest of them, you cannot call them be'aqal, but they're not supposed to use the aql that they have. And using this, all the narratives are fashioned. If you start from, even if you do not go back to Shah Waliullah, even if you go back to the modern two-nation theorist, that is the Sayyid Ahmad Khan, and you move to Iqbal and you read Iqbal's Shikwa and Jawab-e-Shikwa and all that stuff, though somehow our secularized version only remembers Sare Jahan Se Acha and doesn't remember that Iqbal himself disowned it. And he came up with his Milli Tarana, and then it came up with Shikwa and Jawab-e-Shikwa. So I actually, when I started writing this book, and to be fair, it was commissioned by Bloomsbury, because they read some of my articles and they liked it, and they said that why don't you write a book, because you already have so many articles written. And Praveen Tiwari, who is the head of nonfiction of Bloomsbury, was the one who called me up and he encouraged me to write this. And when I started writing, then I thought that we must have the basic background, that basic mindset. The basic Ashraf mindset is something that our people simply do not know. The only people who explored this after independence are probably Sitaram Goyal and Ram Sarup, and maybe some other people. H.V. Seshadri has written something good. Sardar Gurcharan Singh Talib has written something on the atrocities that happened. But most of it, because of our, as Mr. Sood referred to, the secularized, whitewashed history, everything became touch me not. That is, anything that is unpalatable to the Ashraf Mullah Maulana class should not come out in the open. This is something totally different from the Holocaust narrative of the Jews. There were tremendous atrocities against the Jews, but it is perfectly natural. And in fact, it is expected that the Holocaust be written about, and people who carried out the Holocaust actually feel guilty about it. In India, it's just the other way. The people who carried out all the Holocaust, and even if you take somebody like Will Durant, who puts it at about 80 million Hindus killed over 800 years or so, even if you do not take that, make it a little less, that you have to accept that the uh, atrocities and brutalities on Hindu by the Islamic rulers were horrendous. But that's all buried. There is nobody who even talks about it. You can't even talk about it. The moment you start talking about it, you're called communal. So that's the result of uh, about 60, 70 years of whitewashed education. People call it secular education. I call it whitewashed education. So that is why I thought it was important that we go right back into the very seeds of this mindset. And as I've said in the book also, that Pakistan is not a territory. And I think Mr. Sood will bear me out. Pakistan is an idea. And that basic idea is that mm, the Muslim is the ruler and he is there to rule over the infidels. And I think I've quoted Khaza Hassan Nizami that I think one of the pages says, Khaza Hassan Nizami says that what Hindus cannot rule. It's the Musulman who was born to rule, and he will rule. And he was one of the luminaries, and he stayed back in India, of course. A lot of these people who spouted all these, and they all stayed back. A lot of these poets, they all became members of the Progressive Writers Associations. A lot of these actors, and some of the great seculars, Kafi Azmi, for instance, the great secular. He used to write Taranas for Pakistan. Later on, he became a great secular. Then the worst example, of course, is Sajjad Zahir. Sajjad Zahir of CPI, who actually fashioned the Muslim League campaign in Punjab in 1946. He actually went to Pakistan, was caught in the Lahore conspiracy case there, and he was repatriated to India at the request of the Prime Minister. Can you imagine? Can you imagine anything more foolhardy than this? And then what happened after the independence was that all the people who were there uh, propagating the Pakistani movement, all of them, they either became progressives or communists or Marxists or they joined the Congress. And all of them were labeled secular. And anybody who talked about undivided India or Akhand Bharat or Hindu Rashtra, all of them became communal. So this reversal of roles takes place within about 5, 6 years of independence. All these things, the background of the Islamic theology is something that I thought was very important to bring out and put it before the public. And also the happenings in Kashmir. I think Mr. Sood is probably bear me out all the facts that I have related, including excerpts from IB Chief B.N. Malik and others. All of that bears out that the crafty Sheikh Abdullah, he made such a massive fool of Jawaharlal Nehru. I heard just the other day, Dr. Karan Singh said that the Jammu and Kashmir state, they never requested the government of India to give them Article 370 or separate status. He's absolutely right. It was private lobbying by Sheikh Abdullah, who had been made not just the Prime Minister of Kashmir, he was made what is called a complete uh, potentate of Jammu and Kashmir state. So he was the de facto ruler. Maharaja had been exiled. That is, again, one of the bad, very, very sorry facts that Nizam of Hyderabad, who was there to he was trying to make South Pakistan, and ultimately we had to take military action against him, euphemistically called the police action. Nizam of Hyderabad, he was defeated militarily, and it was then that he signed the instrument of accession. And after that, he was made the Raj Pramukh of the Hyderabad state. But the Maharaja of Jammu and Kashmir was exiled and a regent was appointed in his lieu because Sheikh Abdullah did not like him. So, if you conduct affairs of state by having some kind of partisan behavior towards your friends or whom you think are your friends. Ultimately, it turned out that even Sheikh Abdullah had to be detained and put into prison. Then these kind of travesties happen, and these kind of distortions happen. And then, of course, I've taken all the way, they've taken all the legal pictures and what happened in Jammu and Kashmir, how that narrative of 370 got fused into what is called a concession to the two nation theory, and that carried on, and how it was never opposed by the Ashraf Mullah Maulana class because they saw a way to the ultimate conquest of the subcontinent, because that's been the way. If you see this map, which you mentioned, this map is actually a statement of the fact that ultimately the Muslims are going to conquer and re-establish the Mughal Empire. They're going to conquer Delhi. They'll first establish what is called Medina in Pakistan, the Naya Medina, as they call it, as Imran Khan calls it, the Naya Medina. That's entirely based on the sunnat of the Prophet, that he went to Medina first when he was not able to make much headway in Mecca, and then he consolidated himself and relaunched his war on Mecca and won back Mecca. So that's the narrative. That's the narrative that is current in the establishment of Pakistan, and that is the narrative that is current in most of our Ashraf Maulana class narrative. Even today, anybody who can read Urdu and reads Urdu newspaper, I advise him to go there and confirm it for himself. So that's the brief background of how this came to be written.
I think one of the really interesting things is how you are relating that to not just something that happened historically, but as you said, the agitation that we are seeing around the CAA, for instance, and the way that some of the memes that have been there for a while have just been turned into the same or similar ideas. This mazhabi pehchan. Can you speak a little bit about that, Sanjay ji? This is
Yes, absolutely.
how these, because even in Sri Sood's ideas, this whole narrative control, how narrative management has happened across this. So what is this narrative about both Darawa Musalman and mazhabi pehchan? I think you talk about both of those things.
See, if you read all those anecdotes which I have written about the pre-partition politics and all the things that were being said pre-partition, exactly the same. You can somehow, if you pick that out and you do not write the name of the person who said this, and you publish in a newspaper today, and again you do not give the name of the person, then you would probably say that, okay, who's this? Who would have said this? It's probably, is it Arfa Khanum saying this, or is it Rana Ayub saying this, or it is Shahid Siddiqui saying this? So you will probably be able to relate it because the narrative is exactly the same. After all, the two-nation theory is what? That Hindus and Muslims cannot live together. So then in 70s or the 80s, when the Shah Bano case comes, they talk of Milli Tashakhus. What is Milli Tashakhus? Special community identity. A special community identity means, again, that we have to be separate. We cannot be identified with the Hindus at all. As if we are not living in a democracy, because in a democracy it is one citizen that is important, and it is the total collective of every one of the citizens. So it is 1 + 1 + 1 that makes 1.3 billion. But not according to them. According to them, the community identity is primary. And then when it comes to the CAA, anti-CAA riots, or about 370, then it is mazhabi pehchan. Exactly the same narrative. As I say, that you take out what Khwaja Hasan Nizami said, and you publish today that, okay, Sharjeel Imam is saying this, nobody is going to question you. That what Khwaja Hasan Nizami was saying in the 1920s, if you pluck that out and you publish it tomorrow and say that this was said by Sharjeel Imam, everybody will accept. Yes, this is what it is.
And there are two ideas that really come through very clearly. One is this whole control of this Ashraf class that you're talking about. So how is it that has been also completely wiped out from the discourse? I mean, even if I look at something like the Sachar Commission report, uh, it talks about all kinds of differentiation and identity, but it completely washes over the huge division in identity which is within the Muslim community, where one set is very privileged and which is controlling the other set. Why is it that this has been wiped out from the discourse?
You see, this is, I don't know whether you've seen some of the Jaipur Dialogues episodes which I have been conducting with the Pasmanda activists. I think they are the ones who bring it out the best. They say that, okay, Pasmanda, they are used only to beef up the numbers. And the entire community is controlled by those handful of people, the Ashraf Mullah Maulana class, the AMM. I have coined this new term called AMM. So the AMM controls the narrative, AMM controls the class. So you will often hear them talking about, okay, the Muslims need reservation, but they will never talk about that, okay, all the OBCs, that is the Pasmanda, they already get reservation under the OBC category. No, that's not enough. They want reservation for the Ashraf, and for that they need a reservation exclusively for Muslims.
Right.
Otherwise, if the backward are getting the reservation, why would they need reservation for the Muslims separately?
Right.
That's because it reinforces that separatist identity, that entire separatist philosophy that is integral to Islam, that gets reinforced. And that is actually the, what is called the, uh, that's what the AMM class feeds on. That's what it fattens on.
And the other aspect that the book brings out, which I noticed, was the role of the communist parties in this, and how, you mentioned this something called the Adhikari thesis. I don't want to give away everything in the book. As I said, this book is an absolute encyclopedia of I don't know how anybody who's a contemporary journalist, author, anybody who's writing on these issues can write without the knowledge of the things that you've brought out. So one of the things I wanted you to briefly mention is like the role of the Communist Party, and what is this Adhikari thesis?
Well, this Adhikari thesis is actually well known to all serious students of Indian history, but as I said, it's been whitewashed. And the Adhikari thesis is the one that said that India is a conglomeration of ethnicities and it needed to be divided into 17 parts. And Pakistan, of course, was not being divided on the basis of ethnicity, but that was justified. Pakistan could be divided on the basis of religion, but rest of India needed to be divided into ethnicities. And the best part is that not one communist party, they have all the appellations from A to Z. Some is CPI-M, CPI-ML, MLL, AFCG, whatever. So all of them, not one has ever disowned this thesis. And whenever I am pitted against a great communist, the only thing I ask them, please tell me, there's a no tukle, we are all Deshbhakt. So what about Adhikari report? Have you disowned it? I tell you, I tell everybody, nobody will answer that question. No communist is going to answer that question. They will go right, they'll go left, and they'll go up, and they'll go down, but they won't answer that question because they haven't disowned it. They continue to be the archetypal Communist Party of India, founded in Tashkent. It's an international organization out to dismember India. That's what it is.
And so and the same kind of thing plays out on the even with the when we were launching the Delhi Riots book, one of the things that came out was how the radical left elements had collaborated with the Islamist elements to put this whole show of violence together, and we see that happening even in this urban Naxal collaboration again with the Islamic groups. And wanted to invite Mr. Sood back in on this also. Like, your book, of course, talks about how this narrative, the narrative war, in a way, there has been this narrative control and narrative war. So how does that, how do you see that playing out in the context of Sanjay ji's book, in terms of why is the, I mean, I would even say, why has the Indian state been so poor at a counter narrative? Mr. Sood? Yeah. Yeah. You're muted. Let me unmute you.
Can you
Yes,
hear me?
yes. Okay.
Okay, I was saying that this is a very pertinent question, a good question, but also the most difficult to answer. Because when you start off with a kind of idealism that through my idealism I can win hearts in a world which is not so idealistic at all, except in its narratives. It's all a game of control and power and domination. So if that is your goal, it is also a goal of many of the Western beliefs, dominance and control. This is also the creed of the Islamists, world domination. One day we will conquer the world, and the whole map will become green. So, in that, if you're going to play the role of conciliatory or not just conciliatory, a role of appeasement, it's taken as weakness. And you come in for more and more demands and more demands. It's like, you're being held hostage then. And we just allowed that to drift along, shy of asserting what is the truth, because we have this great, I think, in subconsciously somewhere, there's always been this belief that we must look good all the time, not practical, not pragmatic,
That sounds very
not forceful,
Nehruvian. It
but good.
seems to have very Nehruvian
Okay.
roots.
So if you have that, the other chapter is going to take advantage of you. And that's what kept happening. Now suddenly you faced with the situation that somebody said, no more. Things are going to change. That's change. It also is always frightening. It frightens everybody. If I change my room today to another room, I keep thinking, "Kaise hoga? Where will my books go? How will I sit?" But here you're talking of a change of whole concept. How are you going to deal with situations? So obviously, the old established interests get unnerved by this, and that's what we are witnessing today. It shows up at CAA, it shows up in the JNU, it shows up in Jamia Millia, it shows up at Shaheen Bagh, it shows up even in the farmers' agitation. There is inevitably, in the first few, I wouldn't put the farmers' agitation yet in the same category, but the others, it is the Islamists and the left wing combining their tactics, both essentially anarchists and willing to take the jump, till they found that this time it's not so going to be so.
And this is one
So
aspect
we have
in
to
the book
reckon.
also.
People who have believed in all this have to readjust. The things are changing.
Yeah, in fact, I was reminded almost of, like there's a tantrum throwing child, who's like used to getting their way, right? And
Yeah.
this is what the Sanjay ji mentions as, quoting Ambedkar as the gangster method of politics. Sanjay ji, can you speak a little about what is this gangster method of politics?
Yes, actually, these two people who I have quoted extensively, and that goes together. Dr. Ambedkar, he says very explicitly that the nature of Muslim politics in India is the gangster's method of politics. That is the same. That okay, you demand the maximum, and you'll get something, and you'll get a lot actually. He quotes the uh, issue that okay, communal electorate. They were ready to. The Congress was ready to concede communal electorates where Muslims were in minority. the British went ahead and gave them communal electorates even where they were in majority. So it became a statutory majority.
Mm.
So that is the benefit of these maximalist positions. So the gangsters' method of politics, and that's the other one is by H.V. Seshadri. I think that's something that I will need to read out from here because
Mm.
he says that there has been a two behavior pattern.
Yes,
And
please,
as
please read it for us. Yes.
two behavior pattern, he says, is
Which
something like
page?
I'll just come to this. Let me see.
Again, the book is Unbreaking India, Unbreaking India, and the link is down below grpr.in/UBI. So take a moment. It's very, very important that we buy books if
Let
we
me,
are
let me relate it out
inspired
of
by
memory.
Sanjay Ji's works, because that is how we support the author and we create the alternative narrative. Yes, Sanjay ji.
What he said was that there's a two behavior pattern in India pre-partition. Now, I must say that it continues even till date. And he said that there is the Muslim nature of Muslim politics and there is the nature of the national politics. And the nature of Muslim politics, he says that it is uh, acrimony. It starts with the acrimony, then accusations, then complaints, then demands, then denunciation, and street writing. Okay, this is the pattern of the Muslim behavior. And says they, and what is the national behavior? The national behavior says that it is cajolery, concessions, then accommodation, then he says that okay, then self-reproach, then appeals, and then finally surrender. This is the national behavior. Now you tell me whether it has changed. I think till 2014, it was exactly the same. And I think this is what two of the best analyses of why the partition happened.
So you keep kind of bending over to placate the petulant child in a way. There's
Yes, if the only way to handle the bully is to confront him, we know that. I mean, that's a
right,
truism.
right.
That's a truism, yes. Would it be correct to say that, I think it comes out in your book also, that it was the Barelvis, the so called moderates, who were Jinnah's main strength?
Yes, that is
Moderates
actually
of.
right. The only thing is that I do not consider Barelvis as moderates. That's why I have written a
That's
whole
what I
chapter on.
said, the so called. People tell us, used to say, Barelvis are moderate, the Deobandis are the hardliners.
And that's why I wrote a whole chapter on Sufism.
Yeah.
Because these Barelvis are what? They're basically Sufi Federation. Ahmad Raza Barelvi created this Sufi Federation, which consists of all the tariqas and silsilas except one silsilas of the Naqshbandis. And the Mohammedan law as it operated is basically the Naqshbandi law that was promulgated by way of Fatawa Alamgiri, and that was basically Ahmad Sarhindi's Naqshbandi Silsila. That is the one that Devbandis follow, basically. But all of them are Sufis anyway. Aurangzeb was a Sufi, foremost Sufi. Aurangzeb's people who wrote Fatawa Alamgiri were all Sufis. And one of them, their deputy, the person who was the head was the Nizam Burhanpuri, was a Naqshbandi Sufi. Then his deputy was Shah Abdul Rahim, the famous Rahimia Madrasa runs after his name. And his son was who? Shah Waliullah. And Shah Waliullah's son, Shah Abdul Aziz. All of these people, Shah Waliullah is the one who invited Ahmad Shah Abdali.
Ahmad Shah Abdali, yes.
Yeah, and created this alliance between Ahmad Shah Abdali and the Shia Asafudullah of Awadh and Najibullah, and took on the Marathas because he said that okay, that the Bhagwa is now fluttering over the Lal Qila of 1757. It was there. The Maratha flag was fluttering proudly the Lal Qila side by side with the Mughal Parcham. So he said it has become Darul Harb. Invite the Afghan king.
Yeah.
And the AMM class calls him a freedom fighter, just by the way. Just as the AMM class also calls Sirajuddaulah a freedom fighter, they also call Tipu Sultan a freedom fighter. And poor Mir Jafar is unfairly blamed.
And one of the things, you're kind of touching on it, which I found very remarkable, was that we've also, in growing up in India, we have been fed this dichotomy, even in um, on the secular side, saying, oh, the peaceful Sufi versus the Kattar Wahhabi, and the Sufi is all about the ghazal and the dance and all of this, and so much more plural versus the sort of Islamist Deobandi. But what you're showing is it's mostly a tactic. The aim is not very different.
So that's what I've asked in my book. Okay, that's okay. Sufis, if there is any Sufi worth his salt, who would say that he doesn't follow the Sharia? Get me one, and I'll change my stance.
Hmm.
The tariqat and shariat, it's very clear in the Muslim philosophy or theology that tariqat has to follow the shariat. And that is something that was established by Ahmad Sirhindi, whose law everybody follows, whether Barelvi or Devbandi. So once that is the position, how can Sufis be different? And if you read this, Arun Shuri ji has written this beautiful book, The World of Fatwas, and it deals extensively with the fatwas of Ahmad Raza Barelvi, the founder of the Barelvi sect. And you can see he's written what is called Nafrat ke Ahkamat.
Hmm.
Ahkamat is the plural of ahkam, which is the plural of hukam.
Hmm.
So in Urdu, you have this situation of double plurals.
Hmm.
They play on it. So
Hmm.
nafrat ke ahkam or nafrat ke ahkamat are given by Ahmad Raza Barelvi. Of course, it must be said in his defense that he's also written extensively on things like, he's written a 3-volume book on why the earth is flat. So,
Hmm. So there's a lot of scientific work as well.
yes. Of course, another thing that can be said in his defense is that in his Nafrat Ke Ahkamat, the priority in the priority list, the most hated is number one is Devbandi. The Mushrikeen comes a little below Devbandis. It's probably number 2 or 3.
And why is
Where
that?
does
What is the conflict? Go ahead, Mr. Su.
I said, where does Audrey Tushka gets her data for Aurangzeb from? That
Sorry,
he was
Audrey Trushke.
yes.
She gets it from Wendy Doniger and she gets it from Devdutt Patnaik. I don't
Okay.
know whether you know that Devdutt Patnaik is actually a disciple of Wendy Doniger.
Yes, yes, yes.
So they have the
All
same guru.
right.
And that goes back to this whole narrative story. It's very interesting. I was doing some research, and there were these white supremacist groups, and one of the things on the internet they were saying was, to counter some of the things about benevolent Hindus and so on and so forth, use Wendy Doniger's work, so because that's going to, and of course she's held up as this big, neutral secular scholar.
Of course, the Western academia is heavily compromised, but that's a topic for another day.
Yes, 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 absolutely. So coming back, it's one of the real, as I said, joy about Sanjay ji's book is that this is really an encyclopedia. It's not it's not even though it's talking about decisions on Article 370 and CAA, it's an encyclopedic history of how we got here. And also, it has a whole series of appendices, Sanjay ji, which is actually the actual articles. You've taken a huge number of legal documents and placed it right in the book so that it serves as a reference book as well. And I thought that was very interesting.
The interesting part is that in the Amazon, it is listed as a law book.
Yes. And it's number one bestseller. Right now, it's the number one bestseller, right?
Yes, it's
The logbook.
listed as a law book mainly because most of the appendices are these legal documents,
Yes.
and also have dealt with all the mm, legal decisions that I contend will ultimately lead to the government of India winning the case whenever it comes up in the Supreme Court.
We
Absolutely.
haven't got to that chapter yet.
Yes.
I'm going to be reading that double fast now.
Wonderful. Absolutely. So again, reminder, the book is Unbreaking India. It's available at Garuda Books, garudabooks.com, or you can use the short link grpr.in/UBI. And um, any any closing remarks, Mr. Sood, before we end up the session?
No, I just that this book is a remarkable piece of work, and I advise anybody who's interested in knowing what has been our history in recent decades, particularly recent decades, with a background to it, you must read this book. And I think it's a book you don't just read it once; you read it again and again, because it's always going to refresh your mind, your thoughts, embellish them, and understand what's going on, what was going on, what is going on, and that there is a difference in these two positions. And it goes back into the past, but doesn't dwell in it, doesn't live in it. Goes forward, looks ahead. I mean, when you discuss 370 and CAA, you're obviously looking at current situations within the eye of the future of what we want the country to be. So congratulations once again, Sanjay, for an excellent book, and I'm
Thank you, sir.
glad I got it. I'm glad I started reading it, and I hope everybody else follows this.
Thank you, sir.
And more
Wonderful
books
having
from you.
your approval.
We expect more books from you.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. Sanjay ji, your concluding remarks for a minute, and then we will wind this up.
Yes, I think we have pretty much said what needed to be said. Uh, Actually, I have tried to mm, try to go into a cause-effect relationship, and I think that cause-effect relationship is important whenever you analyze any phenomenon, and that was my basic approach, and that's why I went deep into the Islamic theology, because both CAA and uh, Article 370 are a byproduct of that.
Absolutely. If you want to go dive deep into understanding the contemporary Indian situation, what led to these decisions around Article 370 and the CAA, how did Article 370 get there in the first place? Why are we dealing with this over so many years? What were the root causes of partition? Absolutely do not miss this wonderful educational in-depth study. And I thank Mr. Sood for taking the time and coming onto the book launch and honoring us with his presence. And we hope to have him back to talk about his book very soon. And again, much congratulations to Sanjay ji for this just this spectacular book. And we are hoping for many more coming from Sanjay ji as well. Namaskar and thank
Thank
you.
you.
Namaskar.
Thank you.
Thank you. All the best.
Thank you, sir.